cosmic cultural crisis. I wanted a manageable, fixable problem. Well, I have tried to work on any issues I might have, I told him. Yes, he gently agreed without dropping the matter. Though I imagine that's only made things worse. You've kept growing and most of the men around you have not. So the gap and perhaps the sense of suffering from isolation gets greater. Please God, get me to the hotel quickly. Suddenly it appeared, a seeming sanctuary, as we pulled into the driveway. Finally. He turned now to look at me, and I tried to smile, and oh yes, emblematic of the age. What a shame. Oh well, whatever, I'm sure the right guy will come along for me shortly. Thanks for dinner. Kind of smiled. He looked at me pleasantly, as if patiently waiting for my internal monologue to cease. Then, with more compassion than I wanted, for a level of suffering and vision that I decidedly did not want, he looked at me with a kind of warmth that burns away every fiber of defense, standing between me and the pain of an unanswered why. Connally, like the prophets of old, take the pain, which is also the pain of this culture, to the Lord. Seek his heart of love and direction for yourself and for others. He paused, and in spite of my tightest belly and my most clenched jaw, his words got in, and tears quietly spilled out. Perhaps I can pray for you now, he suggested. He prayed, I gave him a quick hug, thanked him for dinner, and tried to hop merrily out of the car. Sometimes I'm ridiculous about not wanting to cry in public. I smiled dimly at a few colleagues lingering in the hotel lobby and headed straight for my room. By the time I got to my room, tears were gushing. I think I spent the rest of that night in quasi-escape mode. I watched Braveheart on my laptop DVD player. The high drama of the movie giving me an outlet for the inarticulate pathos churned up in me. In retrospect, it was strange what that conversation with Dr. Houston did to and for me. Somehow, in linking the word suffer to my unintentionally single state, and again here, plug in whatever your ache is. In linking the word suffer to my unintentionally single state, he legitimized something at work in my guts, some pain that I wanted to avoid for very good reasons, like nothing is more depressing than some old, whiny, lonely spinster. I mean, it could be worse. I could be married and wish I weren't. It's not as if there had been no men whatsoever. I mean, I had my choice to say no to a few. And lastly, what would be the point of going there? To sit around and bellyache? But in calling it suffering, he was legitimizing a part of me that did ache at sleeping alone every night. And the simple acknowledgement, having the ache compassionately seen and known by another, did its own quiet little miracle. Something in my guts unclenched. More than that, however, Dr. Houston's words flipped my why question on its head and left me asking, what now? How then should I live? I wasn't sure what living prophetically meant. Images of wild-haired, wide-eyed, angry men came to mind. But I knew at minimum it meant living in truth. It meant admitting that the confusion plaguing me and so many of the men and women around me, married and single, was real and not easily navigated. It meant owning my unmet desires and the related disappointment. And it also meant holding on to and holding up the goodness and realness of God in the midst of it all. Dr. Houston's words about suffering prophetically had felt like a gut-level punch, but in reality, they were more like a compassion-induced Heimlich maneuver, freeing me to live. It's worth considering this question of how then should I live. I'm not talking about how should I get a man, or how should I explain my singleness, or even how should I prepare for life alone, or how should I whatever, you fill in the blank. Those questions, they have some merit, but they are secondary. Rather, I'm talking about asking for your eyes to be open to see what's real, and then learning how to move forward in reality, even if it's waiting one step at a time through periodic waves of tears. Your steps will likely be different from mine, or from any of the other 4 Boston residents, Your steps could lead anywhere, to quiet, hidden heart places, or to large, dramatic public stages, to marriage, to a single life, to home ownership, to a rented apartment, to a meaning-filled career, or just a job that pays the bills. Most recently, my steps have led me to risk entrusting my Saturday nights to God. Now, it might sound like a really small example, but it's one of the toughest things in the world for me. Just combine an extrovert, hungry for intimacy, with a lot of songs running around in your head about Saturday night. And there are a lot of songs out there. And the outcome is obvious. She can be one dissatisfied chick on the weekends. So, instead of numbing out, or instead of using pleasure, or power, or fantasy, or detachment, I'm asking God to step into my Saturday night scene. I have no idea where that request will lead, but I'm up for the adventure. Last spring, I was in Colorado for another conference. I spent one lunch hour with Esther, a wise and beautiful African woman who, in her 50s, is still single. She is the sort of woman whose eyes make me want to trade secrets. Our conversation meandered from work to men. Esther, I asked, do you think you've been called to be single? She sat, quiet, and looked at me with one of those Dr. Houston kind of looks. With a lilt in her voice, she said, yes, Connally, for today, I'm called to be single. I can't say about tomorrow. For today, I'm called to be single. I can't say about tomorrow. That is how I want to live. Not anxiously asking why, but simply looking for what is supposed to be for today. Think of the story about Jesus with the man who was born blind. Jesus' disciples were concerned with figuring out why this man was blind, whose issue was to blame, so to speak. Who they wanted to know sinned, causing him to be born blind. Jesus' response always amazes me. You're asking the wrong question, he says. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause and effect here. Look instead for what God can do. Or, as another version puts it, neither this man nor his parents sinned. This happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. And then Jesus demonstrated that, in fact, God is at work today, and he miraculously healed the guy. Sometimes I think that one of the primary works God has done in my life is to tenderize and enrich my heart through the "why aren't I married?" struggle. The suffering I still hesitate to call by that name for fear of others rolling their eyes. But instead of the disappointment leaving me a cold, bitter, angry wench or a hotly desperate man-eater, for the most part, it's wrought a heart more capable of and committed to giving and receiving love. That, in my estimation, is miracle-level material. And though anything might happen tomorrow, that is the work of God that I've seen today. Given all this, wouldn't it be something if the next time someone asked you, so, why are you married? You paused, looked him or her in the eye, and then quietly replied, honestly, the bottom line is pretty simple. The reason I'm not married is so that today, the work of God might be displayed in my life. That would be quite the answer. It wouldn't be a snappy one, but it just might be the truth. The end. I think that gives you a feel for the book, maybe a feel for the angle that I take, which is really, at the end of the day, having the courage to look at life smack in the face, and then asking God, where are you in this? And looking for how he's going to show up, regardless of the circumstance, and regardless if anybody is seeing the issue beneath the radar screen or not. What I'd like to do, though, is to open it up and just take any questions or hear any comments you might have. They can be questions related to the book itself, questions related to singleness, questions related to Lebanon. So, like I'm in a press release, Connally Rice for one moment. Whatever the arena that might come to your mind. Now, I know a lot of you don't necessarily know each other, and that can sometimes make the question asking awkward. But standing up here in silence for 20 minutes is also awkward. So I know you to help me out even if it's embarrassing for you. So, if you have any questions or comments, now would be a great time. Okay, brave girl.
I'm familiar with, is this your first book? Have you written others on similar subjects?
This is my first book, so we'll see what else comes out of it, but this is the first book. Thank you. You know, that was a good kind of neutral question. It was easy. I'd like to affirm that, thanks. I saw another hand pop up over here, yes.
I picked up this book a couple months ago. Basically, when you were talking about roommate situations.
Yes.
And I just appreciated your honesty so much. And even today, too, your honesty. It's so wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've had a lot of roommates. Having had roommates for, since leaving home for college, so I've had a steady stream of roommates. And there is a section of the book where I talk about I had one roommate who loved her car, and I had a little fantasy of taking my keys and scraping them down the side. I know, that's dark. I'm sorry, it's very dark. And I did not act on that, like I had that maturity, like I can separate that impulse from my action. Other thoughts or questions or comments? Yes?
I've read a book about Richard Foster called Money, Sex, and Power. You read that? Well, I think this is where I got it. But he used something in there that a single person can be unfaithful. And I thought, how can you be unfaithful when you're not married? And he said, if you fail to develop intimate, meaningful relationships, then you're being unfaithful to charity who you really trying to be. And he said that intimacy is not really defined as sexual, but interesting. I didn't know if you could speak on that.
I think it's a great comment. I mean, I think we know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to observe this in our culture, that intimacy is totally sexualized in our culture. There's actually almost not a definition or a model of what does intimacy look like apart from it being something sexual. I mean, I think the whole, for any of you who follow Oprah or OWN magazine, and this whole thing about Oprah and her friend and how they're having to say, we're just friends and we're not gay, and the fact that that conversation even has to go on speaks to that. And then my second comment on that is that I got interviewed for this magazine recently, and they were asking me something about what's one of the biggest surprises of singleness. And I said the reality is that my unintentional singleness has forced me into other relationships in a way that I probably would not have chosen or moved myself into it. I have needed community because my parents live in Charlottesville and both brothers and their families live overseas. So I have needed community in a way that I didn't even want to have to need community, to be honest with you. I didn't want it to be out there for when I need it, but I have really needed it. And so it's kept me, I think, supple, and it's probably made my life richer than I would have even hoped for. Yes?
Would you expound a bit more on how you create that sense of community, particularly if both of your friends are married?
Yes. The question was, how do you create that sense of community, particularly if most of your friends are married? I think first is you acknowledge it's going to be a really messy process, and probably it's going to be filled with disappointment. So that's what we put on the table to begin with, because I heard recently a quote from Anne Lamott that expectation is a prescription for resentment. And I think there's some truth in that. I mean, there's healthy expectation, but she meant that in kind of a demanding